Hey guys, this is the Infinity build part 2, I guess, and I have started the installation of the flap servos in the wing, and just give you guys some tips on how I plan to do this. Um, Here's my servo in the servo ramen frame, and you can see in the flat bay that the arm is already pre-installed for this LDS or IDS frame set. And a little bit tricky to get the servo in the proper position to make sure you get enough flap down throw and you get the neutral point right. But I'll tell you guys briefly how I do it, and maybe it'll help some of you guys out if you build one of these or any other model, really. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I make sure that the servo arm right here is laying basically horizontal with the servo when the servo is deflected all the way. So I always use a servo tester when I set things up. Basically, you want to move the servo to its maximum position in the down direction or down flap direction, and then you want to install the servo arm so that it's basically, you can see it's basically horizontal. It's up slightly. The positioning of the splines on the servo and the arm sometimes doesn't allow you to get, a perfectly horizontal position. So if I were to try to go down further, it would be pointing down past the servo. So I ended up just with this position here. So this basically is going to be full down travel on the flaps. Okay, so I have my other servo, and I've done the same thing, and I've tried to position the arms as best as I can so that they're both in the same position. So they're both now maximum down throw for the flaps, and you can see the servo arms are basically positioned identical. So that's pretty good. Sometimes with different arms and different brands of servos, it's really difficult to get the arms to be identical, and you might have one that's one spline up or down. But basically, play around with the servos and the arms and try to get them as close as you can. In this case, I was able to get them basically identical. So both these servos, full down deflection, are in the same position. And I also wanted to mention that with the servo ramen kit, you want to use the arm that is the second to shortest. So basically, it gives you a tree of arms, and this one being the shortest, this one being the longest. You want to use the second from the shortest, which is what I have on the servos. So once you get them set up for full down throw, the next thing to do is to determine where the neutral position of the servos will be. So we'll do that next. Okay, so I have the servo just positioned in the bay here. You see the arm coming out of the wing, and the servo is in the full down position. I can't really show you this because I only have one hand to work with, but I'll give you the basic idea. With the servo arm in the full down position, what you want to do is basically deflect your flap surface so it's 90 degrees or as close to 90 degrees as you can get with the max down throw. And then what you want to do is hold your servo in position and basically scribe or use a Sharpie or something and mark where that is in the servo bay. And I've already done that here. You can see that I have just a little scribe line. You can see I did that with the X-Acto. So that tells me roughly where the servo is going to be. And then the next thing you want to do from there, now that you know basically where the full down position is, you want to know where your servo arm is going to be with the surface set to neutral. So we'll do that next. Okay, so the Infinity is provided with this cool plywood template to set neutral on the wing because you basically don't have any other reference points. So just set this on the wing and then tape up the flap. and you'll get the flap in the neutral position. And then obviously this arm's going to be in a certain position, and what you want to do is rotate the servo with the tester until the hole in the horn lines up with the hole in the arm, and your servo is at that scribe mark that you've already made. And then what I like to do is I'll just put a piece of masking tape over the servo and write down what that position is. See, 1290 on the servo tester and 1290 on the servo. And then I take that number, 1290, subtract that from 1520, or the center point, and that'll give you a value. And then if you add that value to 1520, you'll get the theoretical position for the other servo if all the geometry and all the installation and everything is the same. Okay, so I have my other wing, and I've done the same thing to get the full 90-degree deflection. I've deflected the flap to 90 degrees, and I've scribed the position of where the servo is. So now I'm going to see if this theoretical position of 1750 should be the neutral point. So I'm going to center the flap, and I'm going to move the servo to that line, and with the servo tester move the arm to 1750 and see if I'm close to the 0 or neutral on the wing. Hopefully I'm really close. We'll see. Alright, I got my flap set to neutral using the gauge. I have my servo tester set to 750. It's bouncing around a little bit. And I have my servo just temporarily installed with the arm, and it's lining up pretty close to that line that I scribed before. So I'm pretty confident with this setup that my throws, my deflection on my flaps on both sides will be very similar, and I won't have the flaps coming down at different rates, and then I should be able to get 90 degrees of down throw on both of my flaps. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to actually gluing the servos in. Before we do that though, as you've noticed, I have marked the center position on the servos on both servos, so I know when I'm gluing in the servos where they should be positioned to get my neutral. Okay, I've completed my servo prep, and I'm basically ready to glue the flap servos into the wing, but I'll show you real quick what I did to these frames to get them ready to be glued in. I sanded the bottoms down with some 80 grit sandpaper to help adhesion of the glue. I drilled a few holes in the frames just so the glue could seep through and create more of a mechanical bond. And I also filed some notches in on the edges, again just for mechanical bond. And this time I'm going to try this plastic method to keep the servo from getting glued into the wing. Typically I would use some mold release wax, a few coats, and then put some mold release PVA on it, wait for that to dry, and then go ahead and install it. But I've never tried this plastic method, so I'm gonna give it a shot. It's just a piece of Ziploc bag I cut up, and basically you can see I put it in place. It was much bigger. I put it in place, pushed the servo in, screwed it down, and then just used some scissors to trim up the edges of the plastic a little bit. And hopefully this will work out fine. Typically when I install my servos, I try not to remove them again, so I bond them in and that's it, and I typically never take them out again unless I have to replace one or repair something. And what I found is that basically helps keep the top of the wing smooth and free from distortions. If I were to glue this in, take the servo out, and then put the servo back in, and tighten the screws down, I would get a little bit of distortion on the top wing surface. Not a big deal. The servos should be able to come out easily if I need to, but hopefully once they're in, they'll stay in. And I did a few other things just because I'm weird and was trying to save weight. You can see I cut this second bearing mount out of this frame. This is a normal frame here, and you can see it's got two bearing positions depending on which way you put the servo in. So I cut the unused position out just to save a little bit of weight, maybe a few grams, and I also trimmed off the back of the frame. You can see this frame is much longer. This would give you a bigger footprint for bonding, but I don't really think it's needed. It also has this little cross piece here that goes in the back that doesn't screw in or anything. It just kind of clips in. I don't think that's needed. This is an F5J plane, so the loads are fairly light. So again, just trying to save a little weight. I will be bonding this pad to the upper surface, but I'll probably do that after the servo's already glued into the wing. I'll put some glue in here, or if I might have to put a piece of balsa wood or something to fill any gap that might be there. Yeah, but anyway, next step is basically gluing these guys into the wing, so we'll get on with that. Okay, here's the resin I'm going to use, the epoxy, to put the servos in. This is epoxy finishing resin. I'm not really using this for any particular reason, except for it's a very slow cure and easy to work with. But I generally always use a very slow cure, high quality resin. If I don't use this, I'll use some MGS or something. And a little bit of Cabasil or Aerosil. And I already hit, mix them up here. Kind of a thicker than mayonnaise consistency. And here is the servo installed in the wing. You can see a little bit of the resin creeping up around the edges, and I have a little piece of balsa glued in on that pad to tie the top skin to the frame. And what I'm going to do now is use a square on the hinge line just to make sure that the arm is perpendicular to the hinge. And I'm also going to use this and basically start measuring some distances from the edge of the servo to the edge of the servo bay, just to make sure that this point and this point are about the same, and that'll make sure that my servo and everything's square in the bay. And then I'll just put some weight on top and let it cure. Okay, flap servos are in. They're glued. I have some ballast on them just to hold them down, keep them in position. I glued the little blocks in to the top skins. Here we go. And scanning across. What's this? Ooh, what's a Infinity F5J I'm working on. Might do some videos on that a little later. And then over here we have the F5J. Haven't done much to the fuse. Servos are in. I did glue the sleeves in that I talked about earlier. And I have one extra tip I'm going to show you right now on the elevator linkage at the back of the tail. So I'll show you guys that. Hey, one more thing on the tail of the Infinity. I had to put a very slight bend up in the elevator push rod. This was just straight. The L bend that's inserted into the wire. I put a little bend up in it just to help with the clearance and to get more down throw, and it seems to be working pretty good. So you don't have to do it, but it just seemed to make the elevator operation smoother. But that's another little tip. I should wrap it up for this video. Next video I'll do maybe a little bit on the aileron servos. But it's basically going to be the same as the flap. I'll do a little bit on that. And then what else? Got to install the wire harness in the fuse and put the motor in, and she's pretty close. So yeah, we'll look forward to part 3, I guess. See you guys.